Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So, The Dagger and the Cross, as you can see on the cover here, sequel to Alamut, is the last book in this particular series by Judith Tarr that I will be reading. I talked about Alamut last week. That was the story of Prince Aidan. That is a terrible, terrible piece of cover art. Whatever. I'll get back to why that's terrible cover art in a moment. The Dagger and the Cross, in Alamut, we have Aidan arriving in the Middle East in the Crusader Kingdom and meeting the two women that he falls in love with. The first one, Joanna, is human and winds up cheating on her husband with him, and the other one is Morgiana, who is Muslim and thus, infidel and all sorts of other things, and equally a no-go person. In the end, Joanna goes back to her husband at the end of the last book because she realizes, among other things, that she and Aidan can't really be anything in practical terms. They exist in a time and place where divorce isn't really reasonably possible. I mean, you could get divorced if you got a dispensation from the Pope, but it was the kind of thing that you just didn't do without, really, really good reason, and getting a dispensation from the Pope at this point was not a thing that would have happened. And among other things, she has a revelation about her husband, which is her husband. It's not that her husband didn't care about her. See, at the start of the last book, she thought her husband totally just didn't care about her, didn't give a damn. That it was one of the big things that had just driven her away from him so hard was the way that he just never seemed to respond to anything. And that it was like he didn't even see her as anything. And at the end of the book, she has this revelation that it's not that he doesn't see her, it's that he didn't know what to do with her. He didn't get women. He didn't get Joanna. He didn't know what the hell he was doing in terms of a marriage or their relationship or anything else. And that, and the fact that she wanted her son back, and the only way she could see her son again would be to get back together with her husband, and so on, she does that. Aidan, in the meantime, has been Stockholm syndromed into falling in love with Morgiana. It's implied that there's more, but there is an aspect whereby he's just kept captive until he finally gives in to her blandishments, which is something. Anyways, at the start of this book, we get Aidan and Morgiana are planning to get married. Aidan's twin brother, Gwydion, finally shows up, and Gwydion had gone to the Pope to get a dispensation for them to marry. That for Aidan to marry an infidel, to marry a Muslim, and to do it in the church. See, at least with it, I don't know Islam very well. So I don't know how accurate this is to medieval as opposed to current Islam, but the way it's described in the book, the Qadi could marry them and it really wouldn't matter as long as they, said the words and stuff. Whereas for Aidan to get married in a church, they had to actually get a papal dispensation because a priest wouldn't be able to do it. So Gwydion shows up with the dispensation, and, and we hear from Ysabel, and Ysabel is the child that Aidan had with Joanna, which nobody who isn't, an elf person like Aidan, none of them realize that Ysabel is actually Aidan's daughter, because turns out that elf children have a gestation period of 11 months, not 9 months, and so people look at the fact that Aidan hadn't been around Joanna for 2 whole months, and then 9 months later there's a kid, and they said, well, obviously it's not his because he was in a totally different city. And so no, there is no suspicion on him simply because in practical terms, nobody would have thought that he could be her father, except there's a longer gestation period. One would assume you need extra gestation for, budding magical superpowers. Anyway, so the big two conflicts in this book are the Battle of Hattin, which is an actual thing. So in this book we have actual functioning things happening in this book that are coincident with real events, as opposed to the last book, which was kind of just set in the time and place. But this book is set within a particular situation. And the other main thing is that the dispensation that Aidan had gotten to marry Morgiana turned out to have been stolen, and the precise opposite, a declaration of anathema, had replaced it, had been swapped in, so that early in the book you have this grand thing, and Aidan and Morgiana are going to get married, and then the bishop in Jerusalem pulls out the thing and he starts reading it, and it's this whole, damnation of the soul, and you can't do this, and so on and so forth. And the thing is that Aidan had sworn certain oaths in terms of getting married in Jerusalem to Morgiana and all kinds of other stuff, and so he can't leave without being forsworn. And then, due to some political issues caused by the standard racism and anti-Muslim sentiment that, is so much part of the Crusades, or at least the Western part of the Crusades, causes the relationship, the tentative peace that they were holding with Saladin, it falls apart, and everybody decides, no, we have to go to war to win stuff back from Saladin. And the man who, in the first book, King Baldwin is a teenager, but unfortunately he is, while very, very smart and shockingly a good general and a whole bunch of other things, he was a leper and he died very, very young. It was the Middle Ages, and if you got something like that, you pretty much were just going to die. And, or rather going to die young. And so Baldwin died young, and King Guy takes his place, and the problem is that King Guy, and in the end notes, which Judith Tarr has in all of her historical fiction novels, these are end notes where she talks about real people and real events that are in her novel, and where the differences are between them, and where her evidence is for her characterizations. King Guy, she describes and characterizes in this novel as being somebody who's very good looking and a pretty decent knight, but really bad at being king. And he winds up making an incredibly stupid tactical decision. The Middle East, there's a lot of desert. There's a lot of desert around all of those places in Israel, in Canaan, in the Jerusalem kingdom that you would have had at the time. And he decides to listen to the Templars, who say, no, we have to go after him and we have to charge after him, and decides he's going to trek an entire army through a desert with no water, no access to water, nowhere to go to get water, over miles and miles of terrain, with Saladin's army, who have a much better set of supply lines and are better dressed and designed and adapted for fighting in the desert, because shockingly they're all from there. And they get harried the whole way down. And And they wind up losing this battle terribly because all of Guy's decisions are just bad ones, and the Templars don't help because they're being idiots too. And in the end, it all falls apart. And so the story of Aidan and Morgiana and their problems sort of get twined with this backdrop because she is a faithful Muslim. She's not going to stop being a Muslim. She will always follow Islam. And so given that Saladin is a defender of Islam, is the one who is standing up for the rights, for their access to the Dome of the Rock, for their access to all of these holy sites, because Jerusalem is the holy center of 3 religions simultaneously, none of whom can just suck it up and get along and accept that everybody else should be in the same place. And so what happens is that she and Aidan are on opposite sides of the war. Now, what she does in this mind is she acts purely defensively. In very practical terms, what she sets out to do is to ensure that Aidan and his brother Gwydion aren't able to use their magic powers to roll right over Saladin's forces. And she basically stops at that. Because, as she puts it, men should fight this out. And I was staying here to keep things being equal, but now, after Hattin, Saladin basically gets Gwydion and Aidan's oaths to leave. And go back to Rihanna. And so the moment he gets that, she leaves too, because she is not going to pit herself against the man she wants to get married to. She has no intention of being on opposite sides of a war. She will stay to the side of the war that is, necessary according to her faith, but she's not going to go to the other thing. This, of course, runs directly counter to Aidan's Mamluks, who Saladin gave them, in effect, to Aidan, and Aidan, brought them along with, and they fought on the side of the Crusaders, and they said, we have given ourselves over to our prince, and we're sticking with our prince. We believe that, this is our duty, so yes, we are fighting for our prince. And, it's an interesting sort of back and forth push-pull of, faith versus oaths versus what your faith says about your oaths. And as to why this is bad cover art, it's not, really, really bad cover art, but Aidan is supposed to be, I don't know, black-haired and very, very pale, and that guy doesn't look very pale, and Morgiana is supposed to have, hair that is literally, burgundy-colored or something. She literally says that, her hair is a ridiculous color, which suggests that the hair should be a more ridiculous color. And it's not. So I have my issues with that. It's fine. It's an evocative enough picture. It's, medievalist as one does. But I think it's lacking some of the sparkling flash and color that maybe would make this better. Not that the Alamut cover that I, gave for you guys last week is so much better, nor indeed is the cover that went with this edition, because this is an older edition, significantly older than the Alamut cover. There's probably a Dagger on the Cross cover that's like the one that I showed you last week, but I didn't want to bother looking one up. Anyway, so it's really, really interesting, and I haven't even talked about the fact that Aidan's daughter is a spoiled brat because she has superpowers, and is totally a daddy's girl and takes advantage of it like, whoa. And that is a child who needs a spanking of some kind. Anyways, that's everything, and I'll see you all next week.